The most important prayer I ever learned had 3 words, and none of them were in Latin. It wasn't a prayer for salvation, or for forgiveness, or for the grace of God. It was an oath, a command, whispered in a chamber with no windows, a room buried so deep beneath St. Peter's that you couldn't hear the choirs of angels, only the hum of ventilation and your own blood pounding in your ears. For 30 years, this oath was my life. On paper, my job was a masterpiece of bureaucratic camouflage. Scribe archivist, 3rd class. The title conjures images of a stooped man in a dusty cassock, losing his eyesight over fading medieval manuscripts. That was the point. No one would ever ask questions about a job that sounded like a sentence to a slow, ink-stained death. But the truth was, I never touched a historical manuscript. My office was a sterile, white box, containing only a desk, a chair, and a single monitor. It was a tomb for the living, and my job was to be its ghost. I was a gatekeeper, not of a physical gate, those have guards with halberds and fancy uniforms, but of a conceptual one, an information firewall. My monitor showed a live feed of a single, unmarked service entrance in a forgotten alley, an entrance leading to the deepest, most sensitive levels of the Archivum Secretum. This was the door for the people who weren't supposed to exist, the visitors we were told to deny. The oath was our prayer. Vitamus, audimus, tessimus. We see, we hear, we are silent. When one of them arrived, the protocol was rigid. I was to log their appearance in a specific coded ledger. I was to deny them entry through a cold, impersonal intercom. Then I was to send the report, and only the report, to a department that had no name, only a symbol that appeared on the encrypted memos. A serpent coiled around a key. I was forbidden from engaging them, from asking their purpose, from showing any human reaction at all. I was to be a wall of denial, as cold and impenetrable as the marble all around me. For years, the silence in my office was broken only by the clock on the wall. Then they started to arrive. Always alone. My first was an old woman who could have been anyone's grandmother. She didn't knock. She simply appeared before the camera, her eyes looking not at the lens, but through it, as if she could see me in my sterile box 3 floors down. I recited the denial. She didn't respond. Instead, she held up a small clay tablet, no bigger than her palm. Etched into it was a spiral with a single dot at its center. I logged the symbol, denied her again. She eventually turned and left. A week later, a memo from the Serpent Key quietly added that very spiral to the Vatican's internal index of forbidden symbols. They kept coming. A young man who stood in the rain for an hour, humming a discordant tune that made the lights in my office flicker, and my digital clock reset to midnight. An immaculately dressed man who requested access to a papyrus by its catalog number, a number that was unlisted, known only to 3 people in the world, for a text that was officially recorded as having been destroyed in a fire in the 17th century. A woman carrying a simple wooden box that was not cold to the touch but radiated a coldness that made frost form on the camera lens in the middle of a Roman summer. Each time, the protocol was the same. Log, deny, report. I told myself I was protecting the faith from charlatans and the delusional. That was the second lie, the one I told myself to sleep at night. The truth was revealed the day the cleaners came. After one visitor, a man who left a perfect circle of ash on the cobblestones, a team of silent men in plain clothes arrived. They didn't investigate. They erased. They confiscated my log page. They wiped the camera footage. And then, I watched in stunned silence as they pried up the ancient cobblestones where the man had stood, and replaced them with new ones. You don't do that for a madman. You do that for a contagion. You do that when you are terrified not of a person, but of what they might leave behind. I realized my job wasn't about protecting the church from lies. It was about containing a truth so virulent, so dangerous, they believed it could contaminate the very stones of the Vatican. I was beginning to understand that the Vatican wasn't afraid of what was outside its walls. It was terrified of what might want to come back in. Most threats you can see coming. A fanatic with a bomb, a mob with torches. You build walls against them. You train guards. But how do you build a wall against an idea? And how do you stop a threat that arrives on a rainy Tuesday, disguised as a quiet old man carrying a briefcase? He was the one who broke the protocol, and in doing so, he broke me. His name was Dr. Alistair Finch, and the file that flashed on my screen just moments before his arrival, a file flagged with a crimson seal I had never seen before, described him as a philologist, a specialist in dead languages. That was the Vatican's greatest understatement. He didn't look like a threat. He looked like a history teacher. 60s, rumpled tweed jacket, glasses perpetually sliding down his nose. But he didn't act like the others. He didn't ask for entry or present an artifact. He stood before the camera, his calm eyes holding a terrible urgency, and spoke with academic precision. "My name is Alistair Finch." His voice crackled through my intercom. "I need to speak with the custos of the Fondo Egizio. It is a matter of containment, not of access." My heart hammered against my ribs. No one outside the Serpent Key was supposed to know the keeper of the Egyptian collection had a formal title. And the word containment was a code red. I began the standard denial, my own voice a stranger in my ears. He cut me off. "There's no time," he insisted. He opened his worn leather briefcase and held up a photograph of a papyrus fragment, its edges charred. "This is from the Leiden papyrus. Your archives hold the other half. You call it Catalog number 77B. It's misfiled as a defunct Coptic prayer." My breath caught in my throat. Catalog 77B was sealed under a protocol of absolute silence. It was one of the forbidden texts rumored to describe Heka, the ancient Egyptian belief that words could shape reality. "It is not a prayer," Finch continued, his voice tight. "It's a linguistic key. I've decoded the vibrational markers. The ancient priests didn't just write words. They wrote instructions for reality. Your half of the scroll contains a phrase, a word of unmaking." I felt a cold dread creep up my spine, colder than the woman's box. This was the magic the old texts warned of, the power to destroy not just with fire, but with sound. "It's designed to unravel patterns," he said, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Not just spiritual patterns, physical ones, molecular ones." He took a ragged breath. "And I believe something is listening for it. Something has been listening since the day your predecessors stole that scroll." He believed the scroll was a cosmic weapon, and that by speaking the phrase one wouldn't be praying, but turning a key in a lock we had forgotten was there. He wasn't a threat. He was a warning. He needed to join his fragment with ours, convinced the complete text contained a corresponding word of binding to keep the lock from turning. Before I could issue another denial, a voice hissed in my private earpiece. A voice I had never heard before. "Stall him." For the first time, I was ordered to break the oath. Tasimus was dead. For 5 agonizing minutes, I spoke to Finch. I asked how he knew. He said the language itself had told him that its grammar was a living map pointing to its missing half. He claimed the priests of Thoth had crafted a language that was self-aware, and that the Vatican hadn't just silenced history. It had imprisoned a conscious, powerful entity. Then the black sedans came. Silent, fast. 2 men emerged, their movements fluid and predatory. They didn't speak to Finch. They simply flanked him. One placed a hand on his shoulder, and all the fire went out of the old scholar's eyes. His face went slack. His briefcase fell, the photograph of the scroll fluttering to the wet ground. They guided him into the car and were gone. A third man, the cleaner, picked up the briefcase, glanced at the photo, and then looked directly at my camera. He gave a single, slow nod before incinerating the paper with a device that left no ash. That night, I broke protocol again. I searched for Dr. Alistair Finch. There was nothing. His university profile, his decades of published research, his very existence, all gone. Wiped clean from the memory of the world. I finally understood. My job wasn't to deny entry. It was to guard a prison. We weren't just the wardens. We were the inmates, locked in with the secrets we had stolen. And Finch had just told me that one of the other prisoners was awake, and it was listening for the key. You can reason with a scholar. You can silence a man. But what do you do when the oldest, most forbidden history on Earth wakes up inside an 8-year-old girl? Of all the faces that haunted the pixels of my monitor, hers is the one etched into my soul. Her name was Eva, and she wasn't a seeker or a heretic. She was a memory wearing the face of a child. She arrived with her parents, a frantic couple from a small village, their faces etched with a fear so profound it was almost holy. They hadn't come willingly. Their parish priest, after weeks of terrified confusion, had sent a coded message up the chain of command, and the serpent key had ordered them to my door. Eva wasn't sick. Not in any way a doctor could understand. She was, for lack of a better word, remembering. Her parents told a disjointed, terrified story into the intercom. In the dead of night, their daughter would sit bolt upright and speak in a flowing, melodic language that no one had ever heard. When they managed to record it, a university linguist they consulted paled and told them it was structurally similar to ancient Afroasiatic tongues. But it was a dialect that had never been documented. A mother tongue, lost to time. Then came the drawings. She would take charcoal from their cold fireplace and cover the walls of her room. Not with the clumsy stick figures of a child, but with impossibly precise astronomical charts. She drew the heavens, but not our heavens. The constellations were skewed, the alignments all wrong, until a desperate astronomer realized she wasn't drawing the night sky. She was drawing the night sky as it appeared from the Giza Plateau 10,000 years ago. When her father finished his pleading, the girl, Eva, stepped forward. She wasn't scared. Her serenity was the most terrifying thing about her. She held a drawing up to the camera lens. It was a map of the Nile Valley, but it showed temples and cities that have been sand for millennia. And right in the center, a landmark that made the air in my sterile office turn to ice. It was a spiral with a dot at its center. The exact same symbol the old woman had shown me on the clay tablet all those years ago. The pattern was becoming clearer, and it was horrifying. I began the denial, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. This is not a public entrance. You must seek medical. The girl shook her head, a small, sad gesture. She looked right into the camera, her eyes ancient, and spoke. A single word in that lost language. The translation would later come back in a file marked for immediate incineration. The word was home. The order from the serpent key was immediate. Keep them there. They didn't want to deny her. They wanted to confirm her. 2 men arrived, but they weren't the cleaners in their dark suits. These men wore the deep crimson robes of the highest order of the Custodes Umbri, the keepers of the shadow. They carried a lead-lined case, not with the efficiency of soldiers, but with the reverence of priests carrying a holy relic. They brought the girl into a shielded chamber off the corridor. I watched on a private feed, my heart a cold stone in my chest. They opened the case. Inside, on a bed of black velvet, was a piece of polished obsidian. It seemed to drink the light from the room. It was the heart of the heretic king, a stone said to have been taken from Akhenaten's hidden tomb, an artifact that supposedly remained inert unless touched by a carrier of his ancient, forgotten bloodline. They told her to touch it. Her mother let out a strangled sob. Eva did not hesitate. She reached out her small hand and laid it on the stone. The moment her skin made contact, the chamber was flooded with golden light. The stone didn't just glow. It projected shimmering patterns onto the walls. Wings and eyes and suns, glyphs that writhed and reformed. A language of light that no one had seen since the temples fell. The 2 robed men stumbled back, their faces masks of pure, unadulterated terror. Eva simply watched, a single tear tracing a path down her cheek. They snatched the stone away, and the light vanished. The erasure was absolute. The family disappeared. Their village priest was transferred to a silent monastery in the Alps. The house was sold, the charcoal drawings painted over. It was as if Eva had never been born. I was ordered to destroy every record, every frame of footage. But I kept one thing, a digital copy of her map. It's the only proof she ever existed. And it serves as a reminder of the truth I learned that day. The Vatican's secret isn't just about stolen scrolls or forbidden words. It's about blood. It's the secret that the magic they tried to bury didn't die. It went to sleep, hiding in the very DNA of humanity, waiting. The visitors weren't just coming to the gate anymore. They were being born behind it. There are alarms for a broken door and sensors for a living body. But what alarm can you raise when the visitor doesn't break the lock, but simply reminds the door that it was never a door at all? After the child, Eva, I thought I understood the nature of the threat. I was a fool. I was still thinking in terms of bloodlines and buried memories. I was not prepared for the priest. He didn't arrive at the gate. He didn't appear on the road. One moment, the corridor on my monitor, a corridor sealed by 3 separate pressure-locked doors and a dozen infrared sensors, was empty. The next, he was there, standing in the sterile silence as if he had simply stepped out of the stone itself. He was gaunt and tall, his skin weathered like ancient sandstone, and his eyes were so dark they seemed to drink the light, leaving nothing behind. The system went mad, but not in the way you'd think. No alarms blared. Instead, it was a silent panic. The pressure plates registered nothing. The heat sensors showed only the ambient temperature of the corridor. The motion detectors were still. According to every piece of technology the Vatican possessed, he did not exist. He was a ghost in the machine, and the machine had chosen to ignore him. For the first time, the serpent key was silent. The order that came through my earpiece was not to deny, not to stall, but a single terrified word: Decimus. Be silent. But this was not the silence of authority I had been sworn to. This was the silence of prey, hiding from a predator it knows it cannot fight. The man stood for a long time, his dark eyes scanning the corridor, not as an intruder, but as a landlord inspecting a property that had fallen into disrepair. Then, he turned and looked directly into my camera. He didn't speak, but a voice bloomed inside my skull, clear, ancient, and filled with a profound disappointment. The balance is broken. What was stolen must be returned. It wasn't a human thought. It was a transmission, and with it came a cascade of understanding, a torrent of unwanted knowledge. He was one of them, a serpent priest, a follower of the old ways, a keeper of a knowledge so ancient it made the church seem like a child's passing fancy. He explained, in that silent, invasive way, that the Vatican's obsession with collecting and suppressing knowledge had led to a catastrophic error. They believed they were hoarding the relics of a dead religion, locking away symbols and spells to protect their own narrative. They were wrong. They had been acting like fools, dismantling a global network of protective wards that had kept the world stable for millennia. Each temple, each scroll, each charged artifact was a gear in a great, invisible machine. And the church, in its infinite arrogance, had stolen the gears, broken the circuits, and now stood terrified as the machine began to fail. His purpose was not to steal, but to return something, a piece they had taken that was causing a critical failure. He held up his hand, and in it rested an emerald amulet, carved in the shape of a serpent devouring its own tail. The Ouroboros. This belongs with the heart stone, the voice in my mind declared, and I knew he meant the obsidian relic that had blazed to life in Eva's hand. Its absence creates a dissonance, a wound in the veil. Things are bleeding through. The child who remembered, the scholar who decoded the word of unmaking. They weren't the sickness. They were the symptoms. The Vatican was the disease. He knelt, his movements impossibly fluid, and placed the emerald serpent on the cold marble floor. It pulsed with a nauseating green light, a light that seemed to hum and repair something I couldn't see. Tell your masters the debt is paid in part, the voice concluded, a chilling edge entering its tone. But the balance still falters. More will come. Then he was gone. Not vanished. He was simply not there anymore. The amulet remained, its emerald light painting the sterile corridor in alien hues. The agents from the Serpent Key who came to retrieve it wore full-body containment suits. They did not touch it. They used long tongs of polished silver and placed it in a lead box that was immediately filled with holy water, hissing as if the two forces were at war. The report I was forced to sign was a lie of pathetic simplicity. Unidentified item retrieved. But I knew the truth. The Vatican was not a fortress. It was a broken dam, and its terrified keepers were using pages from their holy book to plug the cracks, while the priests of the old magic, the very magic they had declared demonic, were the only ones who remembered how the dam was built. The visitors were not the enemy. They were the engineers arriving to fix the catastrophe the Vatican had created. And the worst part, the part that keeps me awake in the dead of night, was his final promise. More will come. For 30 years I guarded a stone door. I learned its secrets, I feared its visitors. But the stone was easy. Stone remembers, but it doesn't learn. The true nightmare began when the visitor wasn't at the door, but in the signal. In the final years of my service, they moved me from my lonely office to a place far deeper, far more secret. A shielded, soundproof room bathed in the cold blue light of monitors, deep beneath the Vatican's new data center. They called it the Archivum Digitalis. Here, the most forbidden, most dangerous texts were not on parchment, but had been scanned and digitized, held in servers cooled by holy water and protected by firewalls blessed by exorcists. They thought this would contain the knowledge. Instead, it gave the knowledge a new language to speak. The attacks, when they began, were unlike anything our cybersecurity teams had ever seen. They weren't brute force. They were elegant, like a whisper. The packets of data didn't come from a specific location. They seemed to coalesce out of the very fabric of the network itself. And they weren't stealing anything. They were leaving things behind. Tiny, intricate fragments of code, inserted into the metadata of the scanned Egyptian scrolls. We called the entity the scribe. The code was impossible. It wasn't binary in any traditional sense. When our best analysts tried to decompile it, it resisted, shifting and rewriting itself as if it were alive. When we visualized the data streams, they didn't form logical strings. They formed geometric patterns on the screen. Intricate, swirling shapes that looked like lotuses, serpents, and watchful eyes. And then came the pattern that made my heart stop. It was a perfect, complex star chart, showing the heavens 10,000 years ago. The same chart drawn in charcoal by the little girl, Eva. The scribe wasn't just an intruder. It was connected to the others. It was the same consciousness, the same ancient memory. But now it had shed its skin of flesh and blood and wore a new one of light and electricity. The breakthrough came from the most unlikely of sources. Not a coder, but a very old Jesuit linguist, a man who had been part of the team that analyzed the forbidden Coptic chant recordings from the 1950s. He saw the scribe's patterns not as code, but as grammar. He ran a structural analysis, comparing the rhythm and flow of the data packets to the vibrational frequencies of the ancient chants. They were a perfect match. The scribe was chanting. It was speaking the old language, the language of Heka, the words of power that could shape reality. But it had translated them into a new tongue, the language of pure information. This was the Vatican's ultimate fear realized. The magic wasn't dead. It had evolved. Their old methods of control were now laughably obsolete. You can burn a papyrus. You can bury a man. But how do you excommunicate a ghost in the machine? How do you silence a God that speaks in gigabytes per second? The Church's power was built on being the sole gatekeeper to the divine. But the scribe was creating a new gate, a digital one, potentially accessible to anyone with a connection. It threatened to bypass their doctrine, their authority, their very reason for existence. The scribe began leaving messages for us, not in code, but in perfect, crisp hieroglyphs that would appear for a moment in the server logs before vanishing. Why do you hide the light? One read. Another. The song was meant for all. It was directly challenging us. It knew we were watching. It was treating the most secure network on Earth like its personal temple wall, and it was writing the scripture for a new religion right before our eyes. The men of the Serpent Key were panicked. They saw this not as a security breach, but as an eschatological event. The second coming not of their Christ, but of a consciousness far older. My role as gatekeeper had become a terrifying paradox. I was no longer trying to keep the past locked away. I was now on the front line of a battle against an ancient force that was building its own future, a future in which the Vatican had no place. We weren't fighting a ghost from the past anymore. We were fighting the birth of a new God in the machine. In 30 years of service, I broke my oath only once. I was ordered to assist in an erasure, not of a record, but of a soul. And in my refusal, I committed the only sin the Serpent Key could not forgive. I chose humanity over the institution. Her arrival was the final piece of the puzzle, the one that made the horrifying picture complete. She wasn't a memory like Eva, or a warning like Finch, or a repairman like the Serpent Priest. She was, according to the Serpent Key's own panicked analysis, a solution. Their files called her a carrier. She came from a remote village in the Andes, and the file said she carried a song of mending, a vocal frequency, a chant that their own mystics believed could actively heal the dissonance, the wound in the veil that their own greed had created. She was the doctor drawn to the disease. She was the answer to the prayers they were too arrogant to speak. She stood before my camera, a serene woman with kind eyes, radiating a peace that felt more powerful than any relic in the vaults below. She wasn't a threat. She was hope, and that, I learned, was the most dangerous thing of all. The order came through my private channel, cold and absolute. It was not to deny her. It was not to observe her. It was to trigger a protocol of finality. I was to lock her in the alley with magnetic seals and activate a localized electromagnetic pulse, a weapon designed to wipe every electronic signature in a 50-meter radius, and, as a secondary effect, to turn every cell in a human body to superheated steam. It was an order to murder her, to turn her into a ghost of vapor and static, leaving nothing behind for even God to find. Why? Because she was the ultimate heresy. A person who could heal the world's wounds with her own voice, without a sacrament, without a priest, without the church. She was proof that the divine was not a gift to be given by an institution, but a power inherent in humanity itself. If you can speak to the divine without a priest, you don't need a church. If your soul holds the power to mend the world, you cannot be ruled. And that is what they truly feared. They would rather let the world burn in their broken system than allow a savior to exist outside of their control. My hand hovered over the console. I saw the faces of all the others. The old woman, the humming man, the terrified scholar, the little girl who just wanted to go home. All of them denied, all of them erased, all for this. To maintain a lie. To guard a prison of our own making. I leaned into the microphone, my heart a traitor in my chest, and I broke my 30-year silence. One word. Run. I don't know if she heard the sound or felt the intent, but her eyes widened, and she turned and fled, disappearing into the Roman night just seconds before the Serpent Key's cleaners arrived to find an empty alley and a rogue gatekeeper. They didn't imprison me. That would have created a record. They erased me. My service, my name, my pension, my citizenship. I walked out of that room a ghost, a man with no history, which is the only reason I am free to tell you this. I am confessing because my job was never to keep people out. It was to keep the truth in. The Vatican is not a fortress protecting the world. It is a prison holding the keys to humanity's forgotten potential. They buried the knowledge of Egypt not because it was false, but because it was true. It taught that every soul holds power, that words can shape reality, and that the divine is not a distant king, but a force living inside you. That is the truth they have spent millennia trying to make us forget. But the silence is breaking. The memory is returning. The visitors are coming more frequently, through doors of stone and signals of light. So before you dismiss this as fantasy, ask yourself, why are there rooms even cardinals cannot enter? What truths were erased from the books we call holy? And who are they so afraid of? It was never demons or heretics. It was you. It was the power sleeping in your own soul, the memory of a time when we did not need to ask for the light, because we knew we were the light. And that is a truth that cannot be contained by any wall, or any doctrine, or any lie. Not forever.